I'm Gillian Dagan.
And I'm Ivy Cho.
And we are with ABC Research Laboratories. And today we're going to be talking about menu labeling and how to mitigate some of your risk with putting out nutritional values on your menus. Just as a quick housekeeping item before we start, this webinar is kind of part 2 of a webinar series that we're doing on menu nutritional labeling. If you did not get to see part 1, which really goes over the draft guidance and kind of all of the ideas that the FDA has had on implementing nutritional values for menus, you can go ahead and go to foodtestingexperts.com, and you will see a link on there where you can go ahead and watch part 1 of the webinar as a YouTube video. So if you want to just get some good background, again, that's at foodtestingexperts.com. We can send everybody a follow-up email with that address after the webinar today. But that's kind of part 1. And then today for part 2, we're going to talk about mitigation of risk, because whenever you share information with the general public, there is definitely a risk associated with that. And we just want to talk today about some of the best practices that restaurant chains can follow to make sure that you just have all of your bases covered and you're putting out the most responsible information. So a general update for the menu labeling, the National Restaurant Association show just took place in Chicago a couple weeks ago, and the word on the street from the NRA show was that we're likely to see final rules for menu labeling in November of this year. It's something that everybody's kind of been waiting to see what the FDA is going to put out. So November of 2012, we're probably going to see the final rule come out. And what's interesting, and the question that's still being asked, is what's the implementation period for this final rule? The original draft guidance actually had a 6-month implementation period. And looking at what the FDA usually does, that's a pretty short implementation period. So a lot of the comments that were received, put in from National Chain Restaurant Association, the NRA, a number of industry partners, was to push for a 12-month implementation period rather than 6 months. Hopefully the FDA will at least compromise, but the implementation period is probably one of the scariest parts of the final guidance. So preparation is key, and that was the major message at the NRA show, is just be prepared, know how it's going to affect your business, and really think about that timeline. You need to have a plan of attack. So in creating a timeline, what Ivy and I did for this webinar is to go ahead and kind of put forth some questions that that you can ask yourself about your chain, about how long it's going to take to make certain changes to your menu boards, all of that. So what we did is, in thinking about the implementation period, go ahead and work backwards to make up your timeline. So the first question that I would say you should ask would be, how long will it take to replace all menus, menu boards, and drive-through menus? Because not only does this affect, a paper menu that a customer might hold in their hand, but it also affects menu boards that will be placed above counters for ordering. It affects menus at drive-throughs. So not only is it printed materials, it's also a lot of hardware. And if you're talking about replacing that much hardware and that many printed materials in a chain restaurant with 20 or more locations, that truly is a lot of work. I would say, at least at a minimum, a month. So go ahead and take a month off of that implementation timeline. So working backwards, how long will it take to get a final draft for all printed materials, including menu boards, menus, and additional pamphlets? You may run into some formatting issues, when you're talking about the type size for, let's say, the calorie count for an entree. That type size has to be as big, if not bigger, than the menu item listed and the price listed. So you're truly talking about more formatting to go into any types of printed materials. And in addition, think about the limited real estate you have on a drive-through menu, or even a menu board that may hang over a counter. Adding in something like the calorie count, you don't think it takes up a lot of room, but it does, because you at least want to have it separate enough from the price where it's not confusing to consumers. So it really does take a little bit of reorganization of those materials. prior to getting that final draft together, you have to ask yourself, how long is it going to take to organize all of the data and reportion any items if necessary? So you've gone through, you've had all of your items analyzed, and you might be looking at a couple of appetizers or a couple of entrees that have over 1,000 calories each. You know, these might be wonderful, indulgent menu items, but they're also a little bit scary, you know, to have to publish a calorie count that's that large. So at a certain point, even after you've had your items analyzed, you may want to think about reportioning them into either serving half, you know, being able to cut the calories in half, you know, or just changing some of the portion sizes on your menu to help cut down the calorie count. So again, it might be a little bit more data processing than you think, even after you have all the analysis done. Next question, how long will it take you to get full lab analysis done on cooked items, and how long will it take you to have a lab generate database nutritional analysis for simple items like salads and sandwiches? Both of these questions together should probably take up the largest section of time during that implementation period, just because you want to make sure that you do it right. And that means, and we're going to talk about this in the next couple of slides, how do you choose the right analysis, how long does that analysis take, and what's entailed in that. So again, that for an entire menu could take, at a minimum, I would say a month, and at a maximum, depending on how complicated your menu is, it could take up to 2 or 3 months. So again, you're looking at something like a 6-month implementation period. That's half your time already. So even before you have all of your menu items analyzed, how long is it going to take you to gather nutritional data from your suppliers for items like sauces and dressings? Probably several of you on the call today buy pre-prepared salad dressings, sauces, special condiments that you would use on sandwiches. All right, moving forward, how long will it take to gather nutritional data from suppliers for items like sauces and dressings? Again, you may have things that are proprietary formulations that you have somebody produce for you, or you may be buying a stock item from a processor. Although all of those processors should have nutritional information at the ready for you as a customer, you know, it always is a game of being organized and kind of chasing them down to get that information. So again, it's a significant enough period of time that it's something to consider. And then first and foremost, how much time is going to be required to source labeling quotes and budget for this kind of work? You know, if you think about it, if we see the final rule in November of 2012, you may actually be asked to wait until January if you run a calendar fiscal year just for budgeting purposes. So you might be losing part of that implementation period just because of budgeting, getting quotes from different labs, and just making a choice on a service provider for nutritional labeling. So all in all, 6 months is a complete joke. I would be surprised if FDA actually stuck to the 6-month implementation period. Hopefully it will be 12 months, but again, you can see that this is it's a process that has many, many different facets, and it is it's a daunting task to have to gather all the information and still make it within that implementation period. So I would just suggest to be proactive and just stay on top of the process and ask yourself these questions now, kind of working backwards, seeing when your due date is for really picking a service provider. Okay, so let's talk about picking a service provider and responsible sourcing. What questions should you ask when you're looking for a nutritional labeling provider? Well, for one, I would ask how much experience they have in nutritional analysis in general, and then specifically working with restaurant chains and understanding the guidance that FDA has put out there and what is expected of a chain operator as far as what data operators need to be able to give their patrons and in what form and the type of analysis that's needed to get you that information. You may be wondering about accuracy. How would you know that the values are correct? Any service provider worth their salt should be able to walk you through their quality assurance protocol. They should also be able to provide you any accreditations they may have. For instance, ABC Research Laboratories is an ISO 17025 accredited lab. That means we have a quality assurance program in place to ensure accuracy and precision in all of our analyses, and more specifically, all of the analysis that is needed for a nutritional label is actually under our ISO accreditation, and that may not be the case with all service providers. Secondly, you're really entering into a work agreement with the service provider. Not only are you going to provide them with data about your menu, they're going to provide you with all of the nutritional analysis data. Now, the relationship really should not end there. What you should ask a service provider for nutritional labeling is, what kind of support are you going to be able to get from that person after the analysis is complete? For instance, if you have additional menu implementations, let's say you have 4 menu implementations a year where you may add new items to your menu. Is the pricing going to extend to those items? Furthermore, if somebody comes and actually questions some of your nutritional data and says, hey, this doesn't look right, what kind of backup can you provide? A responsible nutritional labeling service provider will not only go back and discuss past results with you, but also provide technical resources such as your certificates of analysis, or just general support for your enterprise, whether it's a letter for PR purposes that explains how you did your testing and why your values are accurate. All of that should be part of you sourcing a lab for nutritional analysis. All right, so after you've chosen a lab to do the nutritional analysis, you're going to have to gather some information from your suppliers, or have your lab gather the information for you, which is always an option. When you're talking to your suppliers, maybe you have a salad dressing supplier that makes 10 different salad dressings for you, and you need to get the nutritional information for the salad dressing so you can incorporate that into different menu items. What you would want to request would be a 100-gram unrounded nutritional analysis from that supplier. And the 2 parts to remember for that are the 100-gram and the word unrounded. What you would find if you looked at a traditional nutritional label for a salad dressing or a condiment, usually you will see a 30-gram serving size. And that's just based on I believe it's 2 tablespoons being a regular serving size for a condiment. The risk in using that nutritional data is that because that serving size is so small, there may be nutritional attributes on that label that have been rounded down to 0 because they were listed at such a low level. It sounds a little bit fishy, but it's completely fine to round down based on the set of rounding rules that the FDA has published for retail products. Now, you can imagine if something has 0.2 grams of fat, well, I know I can round down to 0 because it's less than ½ gram of fat, but there really still is fat present. So by asking for your supplier to provide you with a 100-gram unrounded nutritional facts panel, you get to see the honest-to-God raw data for a 100-gram sample. And in a 100-gram sample, the levels of all of those attributes should be high enough where when you take maybe only that 1 tablespoon serving of salad dressing, you still end up with good and accurate portrayal of the nutrients provided. So you're just trying to prevent rounding errors and omission of information. And you'll see on the slide, is 0 grams of fat really 0 grams of fat? That's the question you're trying to answer. If you start with rounded information, you are going to miss out on some of the nutrients that are there, and then it's just the compounding of error as you use that throughout your menu. So you can imagine how important that is. All right, so let's talk about choosing a type of analysis. There are two different ways to do nutritional analysis from menu items. There is the database label, which we're going to talk about first, and then secondly, there's a full laboratory analysis that should be used for other types of menu items. For the database label, in this method, formulations are used to estimate a nutritional value. And that's how, we would use that 100-gram unrounded nutritional information that we get from a supplier for different ingredients in a dish. And we would look at your formulation or recipe for that dish, and we actually build the dish in a software system. So if you could imagine, you're going to go ahead and you're going to make a salad. So I know that I have a certain amount of lettuce, a certain amount of tomatoes, a certain amount of chopped boiled egg, a certain amount of crumbled bacon, and all of this is going, this is how my recipe or formulation is written out. And in the kitchen, when I go and I follow that recipe, what I'm putting in the bowl truly is representative of what's written in that recipe. That is a perfect item to use the database label on. Database labels can be done quickly and are fairly inexpensive. And if it's a product that does not, it doesn't change at all during preparation or during cooking, like a salad, it truly is representative of what's in the recipe. You're just taking a bunch of items and mixing them together. That software portrayal of that recipe is going to be pretty darn accurate. So this is appropriate for salads, most dressings and sauces, again, where you're just looking at the recipe, mixing a group of ingredients together, and there are no changes to the nutritional value of the product because you haven't cooked it. So, and a cold sandwich would be another proper use of a database label. The other way to analyze for nutritional information is a full laboratory analysis. As opposed to a database where we just use the recipe to estimate nutritional value, in a full lab analysis, we actually have samples of the food, just like it would be served to a guest, and we use official validated methods to actually break down the food in the lab. So that means we extract the fat, we quantify the protein, we look at how much and determine how much sodium is in the product. We actually do the laboratory work on the product itself. The reason that you would want to go to this level of sophistication is because during cooking, a lot of items change. So you can imagine anything that comes out of a fryer. There's no good way to estimate oil pickup on, let's say, a chicken tender because you have oil being picked up into the batter. You also have moisture leaving the product. So you have two different things happening in the fryer. It's very hard to estimate actual oil pickup. So therefore, there's no good and accurate way to estimate the calories that are coming in from that oil. And in a fried food, that's a significant portion of the calories of that product. So for items that are fried, baked, sauteed, or grilled, it is a best practice to use a full laboratory analysis. When you're talking about mitigation of risk and full laboratory analysis, what we're worried about most is just variability between servings of an item. The way that we minimize the risk and minimize the variability that's just innate in a restaurant is that we're going to ask for at least 3, if not 5 or 6, servings of this menu item. And what we're going to do when we receive those at the lab is we're actually going to weigh each individual serving and get a weight for each individual serving. And let's use chicken tenders as an example. You may be serving 5 tenders in an appetizer meal. So there's definitely going to be a variation on how much each of those sets of 5 tenders weigh, just because tenders are not completely uniform. So we're going to have 5 different, if we get 5 sets of that menu item, we're going to have 5 weights to average. And by averaging, we're kind of averaging out all of the variations. We're going to have an average serving weight. And then what we're going to do is we're going to combine all of those tenders into one sample, completely homogenize it using an industrial food processor in the lab, So it's all mixed thoroughly together, and then we're going to test that one time. And again, the averaging of the serving weight and the averaging or homogenization of the sample, we're actually averaging out any variation that you're going to see in the back of the house. So those two best practices will ensure that you have the most accurate information coming from that laboratory analysis. All right, so you may be debating and saying, well, it's still hard to tell which type of analysis I would use for certain menu items. That's also something you should ask a lab that you're looking at using for nutritional menu labeling. They should be able to walk you through your entire menu and tell you what items can be done accurately by what type of analysis. I have two examples on this slide, hash browns and chicken wings, and I think these are two really good just visual examples of why database analyses don't work for all different types of items. So for a database analysis, we said it's good for sandwiches, salads, and again, you can see that if you looked at a salad, a prepared salad in a bowl, it completely mirrors its recipe. Between what it tells you to mix together in the recipe and what is actually in the dish and what the patron is going to consume. I mean, those are identical. That is a perfect use for a database. However, if you think about using, let's say, your recipe for hash browns and what your guest in your restaurant actually consumes, those are two very, very different things. So let's say we're going to make hash browns. We're going to have shredded potato, and you may have some onion in there as well and some seasoning. And then you're going to have your vegetable oil that you're going to use to fry up or saute the hash browns. So let's say we're in the kitchen. We're going to take a ladle of vegetable oil, put it on our griddle, allow that to heat up, and then we're going to add our potatoes into the mix and start to cook the product. So if I looked at that recipe, I would have a certain amount of potatoes and I would have a certain amount of oil. If I base the nutritional analysis solely on that recipe, I am taking into account every gram of potato and every gram of oil that's listed there in that recipe. If I'm actually in the back of the house cooking up the hash browns, they get to that beautiful golden brown, I'm going to take my spatula, slide them onto the plate. What's going to be left on that grill? You're going to see probably a significant oil slick left over. Although that oil was in the recipe, it's never going to make its way off of that grill. It's never going to make its way onto the patron's plate. Therefore, it should not be counted in the nutritional value of what your guest is actually getting on their plate. So with the amount of residual oil that can be left on a grill, that's a significant portion of calories and a significant portion of fat that you don't want represented in your menu item when you go to publish that calorie count or the fat grams for that menu item. It's not accurate. The person isn't eating it. And so actually you end up, by doing a full laboratory analysis and actually getting those hash browns analyzed by a lab with a lower calorie count, a lower fat count. For chicken wings, this is another really good visual. Imagine that you have cooked chicken wings and you're going to toss them in buffalo sauce. So you throw 10 chicken wings into the bowl and you throw in, let's say, 3 ounces of buffalo sauce. You're going to toss those up, take your tongs, remove the chicken wings, put them in the basket, and serve them to a guest. Well, what do you have left in that bowl that you tossed the wings in? You probably have a significant portion of buffalo sauce. Again, this is sauce that it's not making its way onto the patron's plate. They're not going to consume it. Therefore, it should not be counted in that nutritional analysis. So again, with the chicken wings, you're going to see lower calories, lower fat because the oil is in the buffalo sauce, and for this example, definitely lower sodium because that buffalo sauce is so high in sodium. It's definitely going to contribute a lot to the dish. But again, that person is not eating that full 3 ounces of buffalo sauce. They're only eating what got picked up on the wings and served. So there are situations like this where I think you can see that a full laboratory analysis gives you a much more accurate portrayal of what's on your menu, and quite frankly, gives you some nutritional information that is a lot more pleasant to publish rather than what you would get from a database. So there definitely is a good place to use both types of analysis on your menu. All right, portioning on your menu. We talked about this a little bit in the timeline. How long do you want to give yourself to get all of that data back from your lab, and then go ahead and look through your menu and see if there are any portion sizes that you want to change? Just because you want to change the calorie count that you have to post. Another thing to think about is there are things that the FDA considers variable menu items, and in the final rule it will be interesting to see how they allow us to publish calorie counts on the menu. For instance, if you have combo meals or you have, let's say, pizzas with different toppings, or you have a buffet. You may be serving on a buffet, and in the draft guidance, the FDA gave the option of either listing a calorie count next to the item on the buffet, either as a serving size or as a portion. So let's say a serving size would be 2 chicken tenders. Well, maybe a portion is only 1 chicken tender because it's a buffet and you may only pick one up. So again, having the data back early enough in your process is very important, so you can look at it, you can decide how you want to publish that data, and think about how that's going to affect consumer choices on your menu. It's good to have that time built in, and then if you need to revise, you can go back to your lab and say, what's the easiest way to do this? Okay, let's talk a little bit about required statements and optional text for menus. So not only is it risky to give to publish that calorie count or any of the additional nutritional information, because you are giving people something to question, something to be concerned about. We've all seen a lot of sensational news lately in regards to food safety. I can only imagine the sensational news stories that we're going to see after people have to post all of their calorie counts on their menus nationwide. It's going to be very, very interesting. So in addition to the risk of putting out your calorie count and all the additional nutritional information, you're also going to be required to make some statements on your menus. So from the draft guidance, the FDA is asking for, again, calories per item. You also must make a succinct statement about daily intake and recommended calories per day. There was a word-for-word statement put out in the draft guidance. So again, that's just something else to think about. How am I going to work that into my menu? Where am I going to have room for that? How is that statement and the recommended daily intake, how is that number going to compare to how many calories my entrees have? And then that's another thing, to think about. Thirdly, you do have to make a statement that there is additional nutritional information available. So as a patron, to go into a restaurant, you'll get your menu, the calories are already going to be on there, but patrons are going to have the ability to ask for fat, calories from fat, saturated fat, cholesterol, protein, sodium, total dietary fiber, sugars, pretty much every other piece of nutritional information that you'll have, you will have to make that available as well. There is some voluntary information that you may want to think about. If you're going to go through your entire menu, you're going to put in the time and the dedication it takes to do your nutritional information and do it the right way, you may also want to think about getting your menu reviewed for allergen declaration at the same time. In recent years, food allergies have become a very important topic of discussion. More and more people are getting diagnosed with food allergies. So as far as risk as a restaurant operator, it is good to have that type of information. You may not want to necessarily publish it on your menu, but you maybe want to educate your staff on different allergens, what dishes you have on your menu that do or do not contain allergens in their recipes, and in going through and choosing a service provider for nutritional analysis, it's very important to ask labs if they are also equipped to do an allergen declaration for each menu item. It's a good way to kind of kill two birds with one stone. All right, so the last thing to consider, replacing menus and educating your staff. It does take, again, a significant portion of time to gather all the information together, to get your menu analyzed properly, get the data back, and then use it in a responsible manner. It also takes time to switch out all those menus and then educate your staff about the type of information that you're now being forced to share with patrons. If you give people information, they're always going to have questions. So it's good to educate your folks on the right way to answer certain questions and explain different options on your menus. This goes not only for, maybe a patron that's looking for a healthier option on your menu, but also if you do have folks with food allergies or food sensitivities, it's a good time to educate your service staff about how to answer questions about allergens. Again, timeline, just to replace all of the hardware and all of the printed material. And something else to consider, we've been in the food testing business for more than 45 years now, and we've done a lot of work with restaurant chains and especially the chains that have been proactive about doing nutritional analysis. Something that we're being approached with a lot recently, because everybody's going to have to start declaring their calorie count, people are coming forward and looking at making advertising claims on certain portions of their menus that offer lower calorie items or maybe items that are lower in sodium or lower in fat. There is risk in doing this. Obviously, there's risk anytime you want to make an advertising claim. So making sure that you have, again, you've chosen the proper way to analyze that specific dish to get the most accurate information, making sure that you have taken the time to minimize the amount of variation. I mean, there's always going to be variation in restaurant meals. They're not stamped out of a machine. You want to make sure that, especially if you're making an advertising claim, that you are doing your due diligence to minimize that risk as far as the testing procedures that are used, as far as how many samples you're looking at and homogenizing together, the number of samples you're looking at to get your serving size weight. All of that, you really want to follow those best practices, especially if you're making an advertising claim. So just some stuff to think about. Again, it's going to be a daunting task. I would just say be prepared, ask questions. To get a little bit more background also on how to choose responsibly source a nutritional analysis partner for this type of work. Again, on foodtestingexperts.com, you can go and there is a link to a white paper with questions you can ask service providers, just so you kind of have a list of questions, and you can ask those of maybe multiple service providers that you're trying to compare, and really compare apples to apples between the 3 or 4 firms you may be looking at for doing this work for you. So I hope that I've provided some good information today. If you have any questions, you can feel free to email either Ivy or I and ask directly. And we do have some time for questions today. One question that I've gotten from an audience member is, how long can I wait? And if the FDA, if we're waiting until November for the final draft anyway, is it worth starting now? Well, I think the restaurant industry in general has come around to the realization that although we're still waiting on the FDA for a final guidance, everybody is going to have to disclose calorie count and nutritional information if they have a restaurant chain that's 20 units or larger. In my opinion, getting the analysis started now, or even just starting to talk to different service providers and see how the process is going to go, what the timing of it is, start doing that now. Being proactive is going to be the best the best policy. You can imagine that, let's say, God forbid, the FDA only gives 6 months for implementation, and everybody and their brother has waited until November. Well, we then have December, January, February, March, April, May to become compliant. That is a significant number of restaurants, a significant number of menus, a significant number of menu items to be analyzed by, quite frankly, only a few reputable labs in the U.S. It's going to be a mad rush. And I know when I like to have something done properly, accurately, I don't want to be in there, you know, with everybody else rushing at the last minute. So again, the message from the NRA show is definitely be prepared, know how the guidance is going to affect you, know how much work it's going to take to comply. And I would say go ahead and start asking questions of service providers now. I think that would be a best policy. We do have another question. Somebody asked, can you repeat where to find the list of questions to ask the companies for completing the analysis? Yes, I would be happy to. As you can see on your screen now in the bottom right corner, there is a web address. I'll highlight it, foodtestingexperts.com. That is a website where you can find this presentation. You can find the original first webinar, where you can watch that as a video if you want to get into all the nitty-gritty of what the draft guidance states and what the FDA is going to be looking for. And that's also where you can find that white paper, where it's set up in an easy question and answer format, and that should give you a good starting off idea of what to ask a service provider. And I would say even just going through the process of talking to service providers, seeing how they respond, are they timely, are they easy to work with, you know, again, it's a daunting task. You want to work with some folks that make you feel comfortable and are responsive to your needs. Okay, any other questions? And I mean, you guys can ask about draft guidance, any of the details. You can ask about timing. Okay, I don't see any other questions popping up, so I think we'll go ahead and conclude for today. Again, my email address and Ivy's email address are on this last slide, and you'll be receiving a follow-up email from us as well with all of the information. Please feel free to contact Ivy or I with any questions on, you know, how we function as a laboratory service provider, timing, questions on FDA draft guidance, any of that. So I hope we provide you some good information, and I thank you for attending. Have a wonderful day.